Good day, all, and welcome to the Powerhouse Perspective, empowering leaders for business breakthroughs. For those of you who've been following us for a while, you'll realize we've kind of been absent for the last couple of months. And you'll also notice, if you're watching on YouTube, that we're not in our normal locale. In fact, we're on Zoom today for good reason, because today we are honored to have with us John Stonestreet, who is president of the Colson Center. But before I introduce John, if you are new to the podcast, first, welcome. An introduction for myself, I'm Scott Medeiros, the president of Helmwise, and my co-host is Chandler Rose, the CEO of the Rosewood Family of Companies. As I just mentioned, we're blessed today to have with us John Stonestreet. He's president of the Colson Center. For those unfamiliar with the Colson Center, it's an organization that's been helping shape how Christians understand truth, culture, and what it means to live faithfully in moments of significant change. Through his Breakpoint and Breakpoint Weekly syndicated show and podcast, and the documentary, which is called Truth Rising, John and the Colson Center are addressing what feels less like a normal cultural shift and more like what Truth Rising calls a civilizational moment, where questions of truth, identity, even human purpose are being actively redefined. John is also an alumnus of our Helmwise cohort. It's great having a fellow cohort captain on the show today. And so, John, I'd like to give you a couple of minutes to talk about the Colson Center, what you've got planned for 2026 before we get into our discussion of what we're going to talk about, which is wisdom in the age of AI. So over to you, John.
Hey, well, thanks, Scott. I feel like you did a great job. I don't know that I need to say anymore. Thanks for that kind introduction. It's been awesome to know all that Helmwise has been doing and to participate in that cohort and that I did. I learned a ton. It was very, very helpful for me and great for the Colson Center. We exist, as you said, we live in a crazy moment, and a lot of us kind of look at culture almost, I think, in a whack-a-mole sort of way. Like this issue pops up and we got to smack it on the head, and this issue pops up and we got to smack it on the head, and it feels like we can't keep up. And the reason is because we can't keep up. One of the factors of living in this time and place is how quickly culture changes at such a deep and dramatic levels. You can kind of think about culture as being both the waves, the pounding waves that hit us, and those are the ones you feel. But there's also the undercurrents, these deep shifts that change the way that we think about ourselves, that we think about reality, that we think about right and wrong. And we certainly have gone through that on a political level, on a social level, even in our understanding of things like families. And as we're going to talk about here, this question of AI is, more deeply confused in my mind because of our widespread confusion about what it means to be human first. And so really what the Colson Center does is we champion what's called a Christian worldview. Everybody has a frame of reference. You might call it belief glasses. Our worldview, like a pair of glasses, these aren't things you think about. They're things you think with. And we have a set of beliefs, everyone does, about the nature of reality, about God, about the existence of right and wrong, about what it means to be human. And through those lenses, we think about everything else. I think about G.K. Chesterton's line where he said, the most important thing about a person is he called it life philosophy. It's another word for worldview. He's like, if you run a boarding house, it's important to know your tenant's income. It's more important to know their worldview. If you're fighting an enemy, it's important to know their numbers and their strategy. More important to know their worldview. And that's really at the heart of it is what do we believe is true and how are we thinking about reality? So the Colson Center has existed, was founded by Chuck Colson to help Christians think with a Christian worldview. You mentioned one of the big projects we've been working on, which is Truth Rising, a documentary and now also a follow-up study to help Christians engage the seriousness of this moment, not in a whack-a-mole sort of way, but with that ultimate goal of courage. And we do that through wonderful storytelling and also the pillars. You named several of those pillars, what we think is kind of the essentials of a Christian worldview, hope, truth, identity, the image of God, and calling. So through those four kind of strong pillars, we believe we can be people of courage and as Christians have always done, not run away from the cultural moment and the cultural challenges, but run directly at it. Because we have some answers, not because we're brilliant, but because God has been kind to us. We have answers that the world needs. So that's really what we do.
Outstanding. And yes, big fan of Truth Rising, and also
Thank
did the
you.
Truth Rising, the study. Fantastic program. Highly recommend it to everyone to go out and actually watch that particular film and take the self-study. What a great course. So well done to you, John, and the Colson Center for putting together those two great resources. So Chandler, why don't you kind of frame our conversation today? We're going to talk about AI. Our audience has heard you and I talk about this subject quite a few times on our podcast. And so, as we set the stage for our conversation with John, maybe just a little bit of a grounding in AI.
Yeah, sure. I appreciate it, John. Great to have you. Um, we talk about at Helmwise orient, align, and reckon. And so, very similar to what John just spoke of, their focus of how do you orient, how do you see the world. I think AI is, I don't think, I know AI is putting a whole new emphasis on are you actually oriented? So AI has given us a dramatic increase in the ability to generate information, to give us options, even give us recommendations on what to do, but it is not giving us what matters most. It's not creating a hierarchy in your beliefs, and it's not going to give you a filter for which to view the information it gives you back. So it will give you answers. And so I think as the speed gets going more and more quickly because we can generate such an amount and volume of in-depth information, we're really going to start exposing leaders who are not oriented and ordered properly. And so when we think about that, I want to let Scott give us a little bit of a military answer. So we are anchored as well in a Christian worldview, but we lead folks that are not. We do business with people that don't share that worldview. And so when we talk about orienting and really kicking off, making sure we're in alignment when we have in our world business discussions, how does that start? And so, Scott, maybe you can give us a little bit of a definition from your military background of triangulation and kind of navigating areas.
Ooh, triangulation. Wow, I gotta harken back to the 1980s, Chandler, and to my days at Officer Candidate School. So, but triangulation is a fundamental concept in navigation. So think about that. You're lost in the wilderness, right? You have a map, you have a compass. How do you figure out where you are? Well, the way you do that is finding your direction to known points. So let's say that there's a mountain peak in the distance, and you know that mountain peak has been identified on your map. So you break out your compass, you shoot what we call an azimuth, a directional heading to that mountain. Let's say it's due north, 360 degrees. Great. You then go on to your map, and then you subtract 180 degrees because remember, you're trying to find out where you are, not where the mountain is. So you would take a line from that mountaintop on a heading of 180, 360 minus 180, and draw it straight down. Then you would find another point. Let's say it's some sort of antenna that's marked on your particular map that you can see from your location. You would do the same thing, same process, and now those two lines are going to intersect on your map when you draw from those two known points. And where they intersect is actually where you are. So what's important about triangulation is the fact that you have at least two known points that are been agreed, that they are established, that they are fixed. So from those 2 points, you can determine where you are. If you don't have fixed points, you're just going to be lost in the wilderness.
Yeah, and the way we apply it to leadership, and I want you to kind of jump in your thoughts, John, is with humans and business and any relationship, to me, the same thing applies. If you want to have the most fruitful, even profitable relationship possible, we don't have to share the same true north. We would love to have them share the, Christian worldview, God's at the top, and our morals and values that are aligned with that. But if I at least know theirs, then we have those two known points. And so if we're going to go off in business or on a journey or we're working on something together, I can know how they're approaching, how I'm approaching, how I expect them to conduct themselves because they've stated that, and how we conduct ourselves. And so that sets up an environment where I don't need perfect alignment. I would like to have it. And the more pressure cook the situation, and maybe the more you leave business and more in obviously to raising families and things like that, it gets a little more important. But, I contend that if you at least state what you hold highest, what has the highest authority in your life, and you will state the values, how you pursue that, and kind of what's out of bounds, we have a pretty good framework to at least triangulate. It's not perfect synthesis. And what are your thoughts on that, John, and kind of how that plays out in life?
I think it's exactly right. I've long used the analogy of the compass. I can't go into the details of triangulation like was just done. And if I were, left out in the wilderness with all the resources that were just mentioned, I'd be doomed. But I do know enough to know that a compass works because there's a fixed reference point outside of your scenario. And it's not just that we're dealing with a culture in which we don't always have the same true north or even a true north. It's that we have a wrong reference point that's been given. I mean, if you think, for example, about being dropped off in the wilderness with a compass, I mean, think of how much more complicated it would be if the compass always pointed at you. Right? Like you were the center of the universe, your own feelings, your own self-authentication, things like that. And that's really the world we live in. When I think about AI, I think a lot about a line from a book written 20, 25, 30 years ago by Peter Kreeft, the Catholic ethicist. And he was talking about ethics in this book. And he has this line. He says, just about the time that our weapons went from being bows and arrows to being thermonuclear bombs, we became moral infants. In other words, there were pre-existing conditions he was talking about, a lack of a moral compass that now was being complicated by more power. When we have a culture that for decades has misunderstood reality as if reality changes and bends based on how I think about myself, or like I'm the center of the universe. There is no fixed reference point outside of my own feelings or outside of my own desires. Well, now when you add layers of complication, like a sandstorm or like enemy fire or, name it. Now, all of a sudden, the problem of navigation becomes that much more complicated. And it seems to me that some of the challenges that were exposed during the early days of computer technology and the internet are just made worse, are just complicated in the age of AI. So you mentioned, for example, the challenge of discernment. In an age of information, you have a million experts, right? So one of the big questions that emerges in a social setting is, who do I trust? Who can I count on? That's been complicated in the COVID years and the post-COVID years and our political storms and political chaos. So we don't trust even, I was just speaking to a group of doctors. Doctors have a trust. They were the last group standing of people we trusted, right? And now they have a trust issue. So how do you now answer the question of discernment when it's so much more complicated? I think in an age of information, we confuse, for example, the access to information with wisdom. Those aren't the same things, right? That's only worse in an age of AI. And so that's why we have at the same time of incredible resources, an incredible tool here at our fingertips to do research at a scale that we've never seen in human history. We also have people that are dating AI. We also have people that are turning to AI Jesus and AI gurus and asking, really important questions that they should go ask their mothers or fathers about. And instead they're asking, or their pastors, and they're asking, AI instead. So it's just exposing, I think, this lack of foundation that's at the root of it. And in terms of our own moral reasoning and our sense of who we are. And, that seems to be the complication to me.
Yeah, and I think you're going to see it in models. You see it in agents. You see it play out. I find it interesting that AI is certainly a derivative of humans because it's modeled after humans and human thought. But, all the way back to Exodus, when the first time it was at least written in stone, there is a God and here are the rules. That what I see, again, outside of even the Christian view of it, is that if you leave it undefined or you're unanchored to anything, the other person automatically will default to some version of feelings or what's best for them or in their best interest, which to Scott's navigation point is a moving target because we all have seasonalities. We have things pop up, and therefore we may be fixed they're swaying back and forth. And so how can we come
Yeah.
to a meeting point in the future? And this impacts business. And so I've challenged people that, atheists, greed, lay out what you actually believe and the rules with which you're going to pursue it. I don't have to agree with it, but I at least can hold you. John, you know what? You said we were entering this agreement to do this. You said you stood for this and that your behavior
Right.
would align with these things.
Yeah.
We've skipped that basics, much less get into the,
Well,
complicated
it's
discussion.
out of habit in the business world, right?
Yes.
These are assumed categories. Everyone assumes they're on the same page. And again, this is an example. Again, you have more insight into that world than I do, but it seems to me that those aren't questions that were being asked before all the storms of technology or something like that. You brought up something though, Chandler, and I want to kind of push on this a little bit because I'm really fascinated by this idea in other areas, like for example, ecology. So when you talk about how do we take care of the planet, environmental stewardship, one of the big fundamental differences is whether we believe there's a hierarchy of value in the world or whether we think there's an equal sign, right? Like if God is a human, is a rock, is a tree, then there's no inherent value over preserving human life over preserving animal life, right? So we have laws all over the place where you can be put in jail for killing a baby animal, but not a baby human, things like that. It seems to me that the AI conversation also, this idea of hierarchy, do we actually believe in human exceptionalism? And I don't mean, and I think we would almost immediately punt down to human ability and then say, well, if AI can do this as well or better than humans, therefore humans are not exceptional. I'm not talking about ability. I think human exceptionalism comes from our created status among the world. But I don't know that the purveyors of AI, those that are inventing it, those that are driving it forward, have that same sense of human exceptionalism. It seems like many of them have bought into that Darwinian framework, which is everything kind of evolves and gets better and better and better. So why wouldn't we think there is a stage of existence beyond humanity?
I've had some success in that discussion. I'll go right on that one. I would say a positive I've talked about a few times is that when you look at AI and its ability to pattern and predict, it is becoming so much better because it takes way more inputs, way more. So anyway, as it gets better and it predicts total output over John Stonestreet's life versus total consumption, if we go with a pure materialistic, rational view, and you're a net negative, why should I keep John around? And the good thing, why I say this as a positive, is there are thousands of people having to code that answer in. So when they're building the trillion to now they're saying up to 10 trillion parameters around AI to tell it how it should respond and what it should prioritize, it's forcing them to do exactly opposite of the worldview that you're talking about. Like they are having to put it into code. And so you do have a contingent in Silicon Valley. I think there is a little bit of a revival going on to say, if you believe in the abundance, which I do think AI will solve a lot of problems, it could solve a lot of health problems. We could pour a lot of money into it and we could create, gene splicing where we could fix disabilities and fix problems. Mm-hmm. But if you took a rational view, a purely numbers view, that will cost how much energy, how much compute, how much money. Well, AI can tell you pretty quickly by looking at the pattern, we don't breed dogs that way. We don't breed cows that way. We don't breed horses that way. We just take we just take them out of the gene pool, which is cheaper. And so by, somewhat used to be absurd arguments and debates you were involved in are now AI is giving an opinion, an answer, and it's allocating resources and money towards it. And so I say that the conversation has left theology and philosophy and the coffee house and the bar and the church, and it's actually getting encoded. And so it is making some people go, wait a minute. That was all fun and games when we were just, chatting over a bar. We were at the local, whatever, comparing an animal and trying to create hierarchies that are somewhat silly or don't exist. Well, the machine has to have a hierarchy. It's picking something.
Yeah.
And you're telling it something. And so I would say that is a challenge to the idea that everything is neutral and everything is equal. The way embedding spaces move to allocate information, to make decisions, it is truly what you see in nature.
Yeah.
It creates hierarchies, it creates groups, it then moves those forward by it's creating hierarchy. And so that's getting challenged, I think, by anyone who's spending much time in AI. The idea that it's all equal and it's all the same, and we can ignore it as if AI, if it takes the advances they think are going to happen, you had better put a priority in there, or you can go down the path of AI will kill everyone, because that's probably the more likely path.
And that's exactly what I mean in terms of the Peter Kreeft line, that, we have some pre-existing conditions here that are problematic and leading into this. So I think oftentimes about culture in terms of cultural habits, right? There are habits of a culture. 15 years ago, I used to point out that, we spend Thursday in November giving thanks and Friday trampling security guards for a flat screen TV. There's an inconsistency of our cultural values that are just kind of right here in a habit. That's one of the upsides, I guess, of Amazon, is that it's certainly saved a lot of security guards' lives. But my point on this is this idea of valuing people in a utilitarian way. We already have those habits in place when it comes to how we think about medicine. We've watched our neighbors to the north in Canada, right, they have kind of a built-in efficiency that's because of the medical assistance in dying and socialized healthcare, that now it's really impossible to go forward in that country without putting a price tag on people. And I remember one of the lines from a theology professor who said, whenever you put a price tag on something that's priceless, you cheapen it immediately. And it's really hard to imagine that we're going to somehow develop better cultural habits with this powerful new technology that we haven't had in place up until now. We talk about in a social media world that we don't look people in the eye. If you can't look people in the eye and see them for who they really are, because of Instagram, AI is not going to make that better. It's going to make that worse, right? That efficiency, reducing people down to efficiency, convenience, productivity, that stuff's already deeply ingrained in our habits leading into this new powerful technology.
So a personal question, we've mentioned, kind of your true north. How do you keep yourself in alignment with your true north, or make sure it's still established in order to gauge your behavior? So we'll talk to practical business use. Like how could you do it as a leader every day? So even before you get to hierarchies, pretty hard to hierarchy unless you've already set up something at the highest, because it's got a waterfall.
Well, I tell you how we're thinking about it, and I'm not even about to pretend like it's not a lot harder in other people's worlds. I mean, I pontificate, I write, I speak, and it's easy to say stuff. It's a lot harder to live stuff in a cultural setting. So I want to acknowledge that up front. But I will say that there are two theological framings, and I think it's interesting that you gave the two reference points, Scott, as needed to triangulate. Because I've always just kind of thought about it on a philosophical level, like, well, you need God, and God's outside of you, and with God comes all this other stuff. But let me give you the two things that I think are good triangulation points. One is creation, and one is fall. The creation point at the pinnacle of the creation story in Genesis is the creation of human beings in God's image. There you have the hierarchy that's established. It's not based on how good humans are. It's not based on how bad humans are. It's based on that humans are. And that humans are the kind of creatures that God created them to be, which is in his image. He created a ton of stuff, and it's super cool what he created, but only one thing bears his image. And that one thing, humans were given authority over the created order. So there is a clear, and the psalmist says, like, the angels look at this and they're jealous about how God created humans, right? Like there is something exceptional here. That's a given to the universe. And I think that means that humans can't be replaced. Humans can be served. Humans can be helped. The best technologies help us. They are tools, but they cannot replace us, right? I have had to work on my habits with technology just like everybody else. As a dad, I have four kids. I come home from work, that phone still buzzes. I have to choose my kids over my phone. I either put down my phone to pick up my kid or I put down my kid to pick up my phone. All of us have had that challenge, right? Our whole lives. And we develop habits of it. We might say one thing, but how we live can be completely different. So it's basically orienting my life to actually treat humans as exceptional. I've been thinking a lot about this in terms of education. There is an incredible amount of things that AI can bring to education. And I think that there are so many flaws in the current status quo that it's going to be really tempting to jump to AI because it's going to fix a lot of the problems that we have allowed or tolerated because of inefficiency, because of not demanding excellence, not having a clear understanding of what an education is or is for. And AI is going to be able to circumvent that. The temptation is going to be to say, look, AI can replace real human mentoring. It can replace us as moms and dads. It can replace us. And I think that's what we have to keep. There are ways that AI can serve us. I don't pretend, by the way, to have that definitive list about what is what, but I do think that that's the category of creation, is that category of hierarchy, that category of exceptionalism, that category that humans can't be replaced. And we have to fight for that. And we'll have to, there's a wonderful entrepreneur that I know. He's done such remarkable work, not only building great companies, but also restoring communities. He has a phrase that he's adopted called intentional inefficiencies, in which he says, these are the time where profit isn't the bottom line, but in order to be a Christian, I have these inefficiencies built into the system. We'll have to buck the system to keep humans irreplaceable. We'll have to do it. I don't know exactly all the places that is, but we'll have to do it. The second beacon, or the second fixed point, is the fall. And what that means is even as humans are exceptional, we're also not perfect. And that flies in and of itself directly in the face of the thing that has largely drove technology. Whenever I hear Sam Altman or Elon Musk or these guys talk about AI, they talk about it the same way as medical technology and researchers did, 15 years ago about embryonic stem cell research or something else, which is, yeah, we know this could go wrong, but we have to do it. Well, why do you have to do it? Because we can do it. What an odd ethical framing. I mean, Scott and Chandler, I hope we've all reached the point that we realize we ought not do everything that comes into our minds. I mean, I think that's the lesson of the Tower of Babel, right?
Maturity. Yeah.
God actually shows up and he says, and it's almost like he's curious, like, what are these people doing? Having gathered on this plane, and I remember in Sunday school hearing that God didn't like tall buildings, but that's not what it actually says. It's just like God shows up and he's like, oh, you know what? This isn't a good idea. Because if, as one people speaking the same language, they come up with something, they'll be able to do it. And you hear the implication of God going, they should not do everything that comes into their minds. But when you hear the ethical framing of some of these progenitors of AI, it's literally, oh, we have to do it. It may end Altman just recently, it may end the human race, but we got to do it. Well, why do we have to do it? Because we can do it. And that is coming from a very problematic understanding of human frailty and human sin. And we got to have those two things, I think, as strong beacons. Now, what that looks like has to be worked out, but that's how I think about it.
I think that there, again, are some glimmers of positivity. I would think, because cause and effect is so much faster. So your idea that they devalue humans, I agree. But the impacts are going to be pretty quick. And so it's kind of like training a child or, training a puppy, whatever else, that the space between your decision and your impact is going to shorten, which is, I think, good. The other area that, I wanted to pick your brain, and you see it when these systems are breaking. You see it when Anthropic is not functioning properly. It runs off and runs up bills and eventually wants to blackmail everyone and kill them. If you think of your rise and fall, it fits right into it. So it's a fractal system. So God created us. We're in his image. We have the ability to create, dominion, to name, all those things. But he also put limits. Don't taste this. Don't do those things. Well, we have effectively done our creation. We've created another version of us. It maps like us. Oddly enough, when they start building the memory structures, mapping memory to prefrontal to kind of amygdala to, animal brain kind of moving down to reptile brain is actually the way it's functioning and the way it's starting to gather. The reason that's important is when you think of values. So what are the values? We are sub and it's a sub. Right now, they're trying to put our imperfect version, the fallen version, onto AI. And so it's kind of laughable when you see it take a postmodern type view that the only reason this is a rule is because you have the power. So as soon as I get the power, I'll create a new rule.
Right.
As opposed to what we started with, which was a true orientation that is above us. There's something above us. There's a set of values above us that we are subject to. Now we're trying to be mini gods and trying to make our creation subject to us as opposed to subject to the highest order. And I don't think that it is coincidence. I don't think that it is happenstance that the models keep breaking at this point. And so I do view that as a positive. Some of the discussions I've had, even with some Hindu leaders, just oddly enough, just different. What system values every human being is uniquely made and has value? What system puts outside of the king, all the way down to the servant, a set of rules and a highest authority at the top? Practically, even without a religious discussion, that is shaping up to be the way to help get these agents and large language models to function properly. And so I bring that because you jumped ahead of me. It was going to be my question, but
sorry about that.
No, it worked out well. So, I mean, in your version, you acknowledge the fall to realize that humans can't be the ones setting the rule for what we created below us. We created something below us, but we're already fallen.
Yeah.
And so we have unique things it will not do.
Yeah.
Same thing as God has things. And so that is a very, to me, good description of how to order. And these are important when you're using the tools, because you need to realize when you ask it a question, to your point on ethics, or a question on whether it values Scott as a person, it has rules. And if you don't understand and quiz the large language models or whatever model you're using, it will apply those rules. And those rules are constantly getting infiltrated with new laws, with new regulations, with whoever's training them. And so it is a good understanding of the technology is your philosophical discussion is exactly how it's working.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you this because it seems to me so far when you said that it breaks, and sometimes we mean it actually breaks, and sometimes we mean it gives us real problems that we're all recognizing, like, oh, we didn't sign up for that. So I'm thinking of the young man writing his term paper using, I forget which one he was using, but it basically told him that humans were useless and needed to kill themselves, right? Remember that whole story?
Yep.
And so we would say, okay, something went wrong. Well, I think something went wrong, but on what basis did something go wrong? And I told that story on our commentary on our podcast and said, so at least right now, one of the most important ways for us to look at AI is as a mirror, because it is collating thoughts, it's curating ideas, it's putting things together in a speed and in a scale which we can't imagine. But it's still getting those thoughts from us. I think I made the joke at the time that, oh, that can, whatever AI program it was, it must have been going to Canada for that data, right? In other words, that, humans are it's okay to off them if, they're in the way or whatever. Is it accurate to still see AI primarily, maybe not even primarily, but essentially as a mirror of where human ideas are?
I would put a twist on that. So there's two key terms that all viewers and people you talk to really need to spend some time in. That's interpolation and extrapolation.
Okay.
And so interpolation is pattern spotting and overlaying similar patterns. And so if you think of where AI will certainly outdo the best preacher in the world, hey, what all scripture should apply to this fact situation?
Right.
When you get to going to extrapolation, it leaves its data set at its known knowledge And that's where it starts making up crazy stuff, because it's now saying, all right, well, here's the pattern, Scott. Here's the ways you could execute, go back to your war days. You could execute this, invasion force or whatever. Well, when do you do it? Should we actually do it? What's the morale of my team? What's the culture? There's all these other things that as a leader, is it right? It's not doing that. And it's not really attempting. And we're confusing unbelievable ability to create patterns across dimensions that are way more robust than any human could possibly do, with actually responsibility and applying an ethic. They're not the same. It will give you the most applicable pattern that it can find. And if you're outside of its known patterns, it will start hallucinating. It will start making stuff up. But you're still responsible. It's that same hierarchy. Like you must figure out when to apply this thing.
That's fascinating. That's really helpful. I'm finding new ways that kind of language of human exceptionalism and hierarchy is more and more applicable to this in this conversation. That's really really helpful. And again, part of it has to do with that we have reduced how we think about human value in such a functional way, right? And such an ability. If you have these abilities, you're valuable. If you don't, you're not. And so therefore that's what's being prioritized in a sense when we're looking, to this non-human source for wisdom.
Scott, what are some thoughts, some areas that concern you as we work through AI? I know you have a list.
Yeah, there were so many. First of all, I am just so honored to listen to this conversation going back and forth between you, Chandler, and John. But there are several words, terms that I've been writing down on this scrap of paper next to me, because John talked about it early on. He was talking about trust, which then when you come into AI is what is true. Right? Yep. Because information, as we talked about, is coming out of AI. And we have to actually use our human intelligence to determine whether or not the information that the AI is providing us is indeed true, accurate, aligned with our value system, etc. So often, and John, you made a reference to it a moment ago, about people taking output from AI and treating it as if it is accurate and truthful and submitting it into some part of a process, whether it's a legal brief or a term paper, whatever the case may be. We are abdicating our sense of discernment, our ability to say, wait a minute, we have to use wisdom, because wisdom is not information and it's not even intelligence. It's learned experience to say, is this the right thing to do? Even though this is the information, is the information accurate? And even if information is accurate, going back to Chandler's point a moment ago, is it the right thing to do? Those are very human concepts. That's not something that we can abdicate to AI for all the reasons that you've been talking about, whether it's interpolation or extrapolation, right?
So the other thing, can I throw some scenarios on that,
certainly
Scott?
do.
Because that to me is fascinating. So AI, let's say, to say, I've got these ingredients in the house. What dinner can I cook tonight? Boom.
Correct.
And that to me is a legitimate use, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have a friend who's an attorney. He's writing briefs. He uses AI, saves him and his clients an incredible amount of time and money, but he supervises them all. So, now he's actually stepping into the process, looking at what's coming out, but he's not doing the work itself, right? Then you take a pastor preparing a sermon, right? The pastor has the task of communicating God's word to the people. It seems to me that AI can do the research, but in the actual writing of the sermon, there has to be getting your hands dirty in the text. There has to be you kind of living in it. It has to be letting God transform you with wisdom in order for it. Like that's best case scenario for a pastor. So it seems to me that even there are ways to replace. Well, the biblical framing is the difference between work, which is created by God with part of our dignity, and then toil, which is after the fall, the work we do that's full of frustration and thorns and pain. It's okay to redeem toil with technology, but the work of our hands still needs to be. You see those scenarios that they seem to be different ways of using the capability.
Well, and you mentioned it earlier, John, because you mentioned AI and you used the word tool. And that's how we need to view AI. It is a tool. If we want to use it to give us an idea of what we can develop for dinner based on the ingredients and stuff, that's great. But we still have to determine that we're hungry and that actually is what I want to eat that particular evening, even though it has the ingredients in the home. And so there's that piece of it. And when I've looked at AI and you look at what people are using it for, they talk about coding and creating dashboards or creating new pieces of technology. Those are all outputs. They're producing almost physical things in a way, but they're not actually empowering them to make decisions, right? Which are going to affect human lives. At least they shouldn't be, in my opinion. And so how do we use AI? Is we use AI to take away the toil, as you just mentioned? Then that makes great sense to me because we're still retaining the decision making, the true discernment, the true leadership, the true direction, the true accountability to what the results of that are going to be. When we abdicate that, when we just say, well, AI told me so, it's the old, hey, it's on the internet, must be true, then we are down in a deep, slippery slope. And in my opinion, you're advocating not only leadership, but you're also abdicating true accountability and responsibility.
Yeah.
And to me,
That
that's where the
hierarchy.
danger lies.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
No,
and I
that's
think
good.
this is, definitely one of the points I want to hit on is what can be delegated, what is transferable, and what is not. We use Heraclitus, can't step in the same river twice. So even if it gives you the right answer, the reason that right answer is not right next time, things changed.
Correct.
Something that was my favorite might have reminded me of, a grandparent that passed away. Well, that's no longer the right thing to do. It's no longer a positive image now for me. It's a negative. Things like that, AI is just not going to get. Now, there is a way to view AI that is interesting that we've worked on, and we're talking with a lot of people on, is because it will not extrapolate. It will give you patterns. It'll map all the ways John has written, all the way you've spoken, every time you've spoken on this issue, what you're most likely to say. And it'll be darn good at it.
Yeah.
It won't know why, if something traumatic happened, you changed it. It won't be 100% accurate. The other positive, everyone's trying to get it to extrapolate. They're trying to get it to give me what should I do to make my wife love me. That's silly. Well, what it is darn good is you flip it around and you take it as almost a memory. And so you would go, hey, I've got this situation and I'm facing it. Chandler's asked me this question in an interview that seems off the wall, but it seems like it's analogous to 10 things I've faced in the past. If you start using AI as kind of a working memory, not to give you advice, you can say, tell me all the times I've encountered a situation like this. What did I consider? What did I land on? What did we go through? Because we still extrapolate. So we make mistakes where we go, man, I made that mistake again. A huge percentage of our life, we re-extrapolate when we don't need to. If we actually went, it's like not going back to the word as a Christian. So I'm going to run off on something I think I heard preaching or something I read, instead of just going back and going, what does it actually say? And we get further out, so we repeat mistakes. So it is interesting if you take AI and go, it won't give me the way to make a wise answer, but it will do a good job of telling me all the ways that I've processed it and all the things I decided in similar situations in the past.
Yeah.
And so that is a way you don't see a lot of people. It's becoming more popular thinking about it. They're still hoping to create a God, an answer, an oracle. We've had AI since long as humans have been around. Seers, oracles, prophets. Most societies have come up with something that knows all knowing.
Yeah.
And so we're doing it again. That's not a new thing. So what's your thought on that same preacher? I feel led to talk about this topic. Give me all the scriptures. Well, another step is give me all the times in the past that I preached on something similar.
Yeah.
And then you start aggregating what could create a lot more wisdom, because you go, hey, that one didn't really work last time. That example I gave at that conference didn't hit home. There are ways to boost your wisdom, but it is not going to give you wisdom.
Yeah.
And that's just the interesting part.
Look, you're talking about like my realm, because we have so many podcasts. I can go back even to Chuck Colson, the namesake of our organization, and we can have AI basically write something about a new story using all the things that we've already said about this, over topic. And what it puts out is pretty darn good. I think what I can't do is then, do that without any supervision, do that without any kind of
Yes.
quality check. But also, if that process makes me lazy in developing the kind of wisdom that I need to develop as in leading this organization and that sort of stuff. Does that make sense? If I
Yes.
let it replace that formation. And because again, this is where the efficiency conversation comes in. And I think the efficiency ethos since industrialization has become so dominant. We usually don't even question it, right? If something is more efficient, it's always better. So let's apply that to this. Is it better for something to always be more efficient? Well, anybody who parents a teenager knows that you have a lot of conversations that aren't efficient. But if you don't have those conversations that aren't efficient, you don't have the kind of formation in the long run so that they become the young adults that they need to. I mean, there are times when you need to stop the conversation, but most of the time you need to stay in that conversation, as maddening as it can be to go around and around and around and around and around. I don't know. Maybe you've never had that experience. I've had that experience with teenage daughters. It's just not an efficient process. I think about work. I want to come back to that. I don't want to jump off the topic you're on, but I also want to think about work because I want to hear from you guys on this. What you think about making the process more efficient, and therefore it robs, especially young men in our culture, of work. I have a relative who's on disability in his 30s. It's not good for him to not work. Like work is part of the creation narrative, one of those beacons we talked about, right? One of those fixed reference points. If it makes us, in a Wall-E kind of world, kind of fat, lazy, and
Yes.
happy,
Yes.
Elon Musk is promising this, right? He's promising we're going to have,
Abundance.
money,
Yeah.
and we're going to have, but maybe we should have to work for our money. Maybe it's not good to just have money if you don't work for it. Arthur Brooks, writes all the time about happiness being earned success. We know that some of the most wealthy people are some of the most unhappy people, that in the wealthiest civilization that the world has ever seen, we have this real crisis of meaning and purpose. So if we take away this fundamental thing that God created us to do, to be productive, to work, to earn our success, and replace us out of a criteria of efficiency, civilizationally, that doesn't seem good to me. How do you guys think about that?
Scott, you want to jump in first?
Oh, I am all in your camp, John, believing that
Okay.
what you receive, you should earn. You should not be given. And the one thing that it always flips back, and our podcast listeners probably heard me mention VMI, the Virginia Military Institute, way too many times, but we always had a certify. It was a word that we used that basically says, I am putting my reputation on the line that this is true, or this is what I believe, or this is my position. And I believe if we can get into a world where people take that sort of accountability, then regardless of whether it's AI or anything else, we're going to be okay. But if we, like you said, look for the easy way, then it's on the road to ruin. And we just need to continue to understand that we are accountable in this life and in the next.
And I think your industrialization is the right framework of how we reconsider where we're going. So we did industrialization for 150 whatever years. Everything is efficiency. Well, what did they do prior? Because we're going to get close to back at the Enlightenment. I'm not going to hire junior attorneys to hopefully get better. They're going to have to be apprentices.
Yeah.
It's just the reality. That's not going to happen. And so, one, linear thinking is gone. And so those who continue down the robotic conveyor system industrial mindset, AI blows that out of the water because they keep trying to make more efficient the linear process. Well, a lot of the pieces aren't even needed anymore. AI can aggregate it and you just blow it up. So capitalism will start blowing up some of this linear thought. Fulfillment, one of the things we certainly talk about at Helmwise, and I think you talk about obviously from a Christian worldview, do you have a noble why. Do you have a calling, and are you pursuing it in alignment with your values? And whether you make it or not, that struggle, which is shown in neurology and physiology and in psychology and certainly in scripture, like, are you making voluntary sacrifice towards something that you find worthy?
Yeah.
And that will either be a job, it might be raising kids, it might be creating music, it might be art, but you're going to have to find fulfillment. If you want to go on autopilot, we will see a huge portion of the population certainly go to being zombies. There's just no doubt about it. And unfortunately, I would strongly wager that those that found self-worth out of their socioeconomic, education, job position, the amount of depression and suicide and things like that is going to go through the roof as well. Abundance is not a solution for fulfillment. It will not. It'll actually create, to your point, a boomerang effect. So, and the same thing happens again. I take it from religious, but I take it to physiological. So if you do something for your body, the muscle doesn't have to do it. It atrophies. It breaks. It stops working. People need something to work towards. The counter to that, I will say, is that people who are, or not counter, another point to that is people who are good systems thinkers that are utilizing AI in the way you're talking about, a responsible way. Let's take all dimensions of this problem, what I've done in the past, what's necessary anymore, what can I offload? And they're creating information at a speed that normally would have taken a research paper a month, 2 months. If you're actively involved in that, I can tell you from experience, and you're starting to hear it, you're just as exhausted in a week or an hour as you were as if it was a month, because it's actually harder. Because when you space it out over time, you had time to consider this portion of what I'm working on and this portion. Then you go take a shower and you go to dinner and you go, oh, I should have thought about, well, now that's all compressed in an hour, 2 hours. So the thought process to be intentional and to be in alignment with what you believe and make sure it aligns with your values and think about how it's going to impact other people is more intense. So the output is more, but the thought is more. And then the last one I would close is, I do think most people understand you must have a Rudy on the team. Like, you just see it over and over again. Sports is the easiest. They hire all the top players, they get beat. Well, AI would have told them to hire all the top players. And a lot of times, almost every team I've ever been on, you had the one captain that was a terrible athlete. Like, one of the leadership people were not that good, but they were on there because they brought what was uniquely human. Some praise, some enthusiasm, some culture. They brought the human piece. And so I do think there'll be a large portion that will go pure efficiency. I don't disagree.
We're going to wrap up here, podcast, because this has been a phenomenal conversation. We probably speak for hours more, but I want to be respectful of your time and the mission of the Colson Center.
Well, yeah, we could go on. And I continue to learn a lot from you guys on how to think about this and how to integrate a Christian worldview. I appreciate the conversation. I feel like we spent a lot of time also talking about medical ethics, reproductive technologies, end of life medical decisions, and so on. And, part of it is just kind of the reality that a lot of this technology runs ahead of our ethics. And that's kind of been this efficiency mindset. That's kind of been, if we can do it, we have to do it, and we'll figure it out later. Trust us, we'll figure it out. And historically speaking, we need more of these conversations, not less. And also, if we're going to be serious about being Christians first, then we're going to have to be intentionally inefficient in areas. We're going to have to, as the historian Tom Holland has said, not the Spider-Man actor, but the British historian Tom Holland has said, we got to be weird. There's going to be weird moments. We're going to be doing things differently. And we've seen that be successful in the business space. If you think about the difference in running a Chick-fil-A franchise versus many other fast food places, or if you think about the idea of, honoring the Sabbath while everyone else is not, and yet seeing these kind of weird behaviors, there's going to be, you're going to have to adjudicate those behaviors based on higher values. You're going to have those fixed reference points in mind. But we're also going to see surprising results as we have by some of these companies, that I don't want to say this tritely, but doing it God's way is the best way. And that's because God's way is the way the universe actually is. So there's a big difference between living against the cultural waters, but still living with the grain of reality. Because culture sometimes runs against reality. So that's why it's way more important to be with the grain of reality than with the flow of culture, if that to mix metaphors there. Because reality is what reality is. And humans are made in the image of God. Whether we forget it or remember it, it's still true. So I love these conversations. I love how Helmwise is pushing these conversations, how your podcast is pushing people to think these thoughts. It's really, really important. And it's just an honor to be a part of it for me.
Well, thank you, John. We are immensely grateful for your time and everything that you continue to do at the Colson Center. Thank you, all the listeners, for listening to this podcast. We've been chatting with John Stonestreet, the president of the Colson Center, about AI. And just a reminder, the Colson Center is a nonprofit dedicated to equipping Christians with the clarity, confidence, and courage they need to live like Christians in this cultural moment. To learn more about the Colson Center and resources that help you live like a Christian, please visit thecolsoncenter.org/power. And as I mentioned earlier, I encourage all of you to check out Truth Rising, the documentary that John has produced. It can be found at truthrising.com or on YouTube. And after viewing it, I encourage you to please consider taking the Truth Rising, the study program. I can attest firsthand that it's a phenomenal course. It's a 4-module course, each about 20 to 25 minutes long. And that can be found at truthrising.com/the-study. John, we are honored. Thank you very, very much. And I can't wait to see you again.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers, all. AI is shaping everything, and leaders who wait will be left behind. The Helmwise AI Captains Cohort is a premier leadership experience in Knoxville, Tennessee, designed to give you clarity, strategy, and exclusive conversations with select presenters from the Colson Center's National Conference on Wisdom in the Age of AI. Experience roundtables, expert insight, and peer collaboration. Walk in uncertain, leave ready to lead. The Helmwise AI Captains Cohort, May 28th through May 31st. Secure your spot today at helmwise.com.